The official answer in my community was no, absolutely not. Premarital sexual contact was forbidden. It was a sin. It was something that could result in shunning, in forced marriage, in social exile. The rules were very clear on this point. Young people were supposed to remain pure until marriage. Boys and girls were supposed to keep themselves separate. There was to be no touching, no intimacy, no physical contact beyond the most formal handshakes or accidental brushes that happened in everyday life. My name is Hannah. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio. I married at 19 and left at 27. On this channel, I tell the stories that lived behind closed farmhouse doors, and today I want to talk about what actually happened behind those doors when it came to physical intimacy before marriage, because the answer is far more complicated than the official rules suggested. The simple truth is yes, some Amish couples did get physical before marriage. Not all of them, but enough of them that it was understood, in a quiet way, that this was something that happened. And the way it was handled, the way it was discussed or not discussed, the consequences that fell on girls versus boys, the entire framework around it, reveals something very important about how sexuality was controlled in my community. When I was 15, I started to notice something that nobody talked about directly. I noticed that some girls in my community got married very quickly after they started courting. I noticed that some of these girls seemed surprised by the rushed timelines, seemed uncomfortable with the speed of things, seemed like they were being married because something had happened, rather than because they wanted to be married. I did not have the language at that time to understand what I was observing. I thought, on some level, that these girls were simply lucky to have found someone quickly. It took me years to understand what I was actually seeing. I was seeing girls who had become sexually involved with boys, who had been discovered, or who had become pregnant, and who were now being married as a result. But what I also noticed was what happened to the boys in these situations. Mostly nothing. A boy who had gotten physical with a girl was not shamed the way the girl was shamed. A boy who had pressured a girl into sexual activity was not punished the way the girl was punished. A boy who had impregnated a girl was married off quickly, but he was not marked as someone who had done something deeply wrong the way the girl was. The double standard was so pervasive, so accepted, that nobody even talked about it as a double standard. It was simply the way things were. Boys would be boys. Girls needed to maintain their purity. The burden of sexual restraint fell almost entirely on girls. The burden of enforcement fell on girls. And the consequences fell on girls. I want to talk about what actually happened between courting couples in my community. Because the official story was abstinence, but the reality was more complicated. Some couples did manage to remain abstinent before marriage. Some girls and boys were respectful of each other and of the rules. But many couples engaged in some level of physical contact. Hand-holding, kissing, touching through clothes. Some couples went further. Some couples engaged in what might be called sexual activity, though the specific definitions varied and were rarely discussed explicitly. What I understood, as I got older, was that there was a kind of negotiation that happened. A girl might allow kissing, or hand-holding, or limited touching, and the boy would push for more. The girl might say no, and the boy might respect that, or he might not. The girl might be afraid to say no clearly, because saying no came with its own risks. If a boy felt rejected, he might tell others. He might spread rumors. He might pressure the girl's family. He might simply move on to another girl who would be less difficult. This created a system where girls had to constantly negotiate their own bodies, where consent was always provisional and conditional, where there was pressure to allow physical contact as a way of proving love or commitment, or proving that you were not a prude or prudish or difficult. I knew a girl named Rachel who was courting a boy named Samuel. Rachel was 15, Samuel was 17. They were together one evening in a barn, and Samuel wanted to go further physically than Rachel was comfortable with. Rachel said no. Samuel pushed. Rachel said no again. Samuel told her that if she really loved him, she would let him. Rachel, terrified of losing Samuel, terrified of being seen as prudish, terrified of what would happen if she simply refused, allowed something she did not want. The next day, Samuel told two of his friends what had happened. By the week, the story had changed. By the end of the week, the story was that Rachel had been the one pushing for more physical contact, that she was desperate for Samuel, that she was loose. Rachel's reputation was destroyed. She was not married off as a consequence because the pregnancy test was negative, but she was marked. She was the kind of girl who had allowed a boy to touch her. She was not trustworthy. Samuel, on the other hand, had done something that increased his status among other boys. He had pushed past a girl's boundaries, and he had gotten away with it. What I understood, looking back on this, was that the system was designed to regulate girls' sexuality and to give boys permission to push boundaries. The official rules said no physical contact, but the actual system was more subtle than that. The actual system was designed to make it very difficult for girls to say no, and very easy for boys to pressure past that no, and then to have the girl blamed for whatever happened. I want to talk about what this meant for me personally. When I started courting Jonas, I was raised with the understanding that I needed to maintain my purity. I needed to stay pure for my husband. My body was important because it was going to belong to my husband someday, and he deserved a wife who had not been touched by another man. The implication was clear. My purity was about my value to my future husband, my value to my community. My value was directly tied to whether another man had touched me. I had internalized this so completely that I believed my own worth as a person was determined by whether my body had been available to someone before marriage. What I did not understand was that this belief was designed to make me compliant. It was designed to make me feel like I had to prove my purity by allowing Jonas to touch me, by being available to him, by allowing him to do things I was not entirely comfortable with, all because proving my virginity was my responsibility, and allowing a man to touch me was the way I proved it. Jonas and I did engage in physical contact before marriage. He kissed me. He touched me in ways that felt uncomfortable sometimes, but I allowed it because I had been taught that this was part of courting. I had been taught that a boy wanted to know that a girl was available to him, that a boy wanted proof that a girl was willing to be intimate, that a girl who refused physical contact was not a good match. Looking back, I realized I was under constant pressure to allow contact, pressure to prove I was not frigid, pressure to demonstrate that I would be a good wife by being compliant, by being available, by not refusing him. And the pressure worked. I allowed things I was not entirely comfortable with, because I believed that refusing would mean Jonas would leave me, or worse, would tell people that I had refused him, which would destroy my reputation. After I left, I learned that what I had experienced was a form of sexual coercion. I learned that the pressure I had felt was not normal. I learned that consent should not feel like something I had to provide in order to prove my worth or to keep someone interested in marrying me. I learned that a person who respected me would not pressure me into physical contact I was not entirely comfortable with. What I also learned was that the official rules about premarital abstinence were really rules about controlling girls' sexuality. They were designed to make sure that girls did not have agency over their own bodies, that girls understood their sexuality as something that belonged to their future husbands, that girls did not get to decide what happened to their own bodies. Because the system, as it actually worked, was not abstinence, it was control. It was a system where boys were given permission to push boundaries, where girls were taught that refusing was not really an option, where the rules were presented as universal, but were actually applied very differently to boys and to girls. I think about all the girls in my community right now who are courting, who are under pressure to allow physical contact, who are being told that they need to prove their love or their commitment or their value by allowing a boy to touch them. I think about the girls who are saying no and feeling afraid of what will happen if they continue to say no. I think about the girls who are being pressured past their no, who are being told that if they really love the boy, they would allow it, who are being blamed for whatever happens as a result. The answer to the question of whether Amish couples get physical before marriage is yes, many of them do. But the more important answer is about what that physical contact actually means in a system where girls are taught that their bodies belong to someone else, where girls are taught that their consent is not their own to give, where girls are taught that refusing a boy's advances is a failure. If you grew up in a system like this, if you were taught that your body was not fully yours, if you experienced pressure to allow physical contact you were not entirely comfortable with, if you believed that your worth was determined by whether you remained pure for someone else, I see you. Your body belongs to you. Your consent is yours to give or withhold. You do not have to allow anyone to touch you in order to prove your love or your worth. This is my story. If it stayed with you, tell me in the comments, and subscribe if you want to keep hearing the truth from behind the prayer cap.